And we're live. Hey, aloha, Love Tribe. What's up? This is DJ Val with Bitcoin Peace and Music. I have Robert Malka here with me, who I had the privilege of meeting a couple weeks ago. And we learned that we had a couple things in common, not only Bitcoin and not only adventures in the consciousness realm, but a few other things. And so welcome, Robert. Thanks for taking time to talk with us.
Thanks for having me. I love your glasses today, by the way. Great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. I feel we have a choice of how we look at the world, right? And it's like, I use these as a symbol. They're my reading glasses because I'm old, but it's like you can choose to look at the world through the lens of love, and then you can see love everywhere, right? So I was like, okay, this will be like a sticky note reminder for me to look for love everywhere that I see
I
life.
love that. Yeah. Who needs rose colored when you have heart shaped?
Exactly. So Robert, you are like a very busy man. You're on the board of the Bitcoin Today Coalition. You're on the curriculum development team for Me Premier Bitcoin. You also have I'm going to let you tell everybody what you do, and we can talk about our paths and how we got here.
Yeah. So with respect to Bitcoin, I love nonprofit work. I'm not in the Bitcoin corporate space, as it were. So my focus is I'm on the board of the Bitcoin Today Coalition, where we advocate for Bitcoin to legislators and regulators. And then I'm part of the curriculum development team, as you said, for Me Premier Bitcoin, which basically which is developing a program for currently high school students in El Salvador. They're providing the first required public high school curriculum or certification program in the world. It's 10 weeks long. It's wonderful. It's gotten a lot of attention, and we're really excited to see where it goes. So it'll be spreading. It's gotten a lot of interest in other countries, at other schools. So on the ground, Bitcoin may be a bear market, in a bear market at the moment, but I don't really know what that means because on the ground things are moving so quickly. So in that respect, that's what I do for Bitcoin, or within the Bitcoin ecosystem. And then outside of that, I help run a company that does interpreting services for the deaf and hard of hearing. So that's a whole other story. Have deaf parents, wrote a memoir, still working on the memoir, I suppose. I will get there.
The Song of Myself.
That's right.
Yeah.
I don't know if I like the title. We'll have to change that around at some point. It feels too romance novel-y, but it's getting there.
It's getting there.
Yeah. But I love the idea that I think the spirit of the work is good, and it just needs to be ready. So it'll be ready when it's ready. And I think that kind of sums me up for the moment. Yeah.
And so I got to meet you at an event, like I said, a couple of weeks ago, but I was listening to the podcast that you did with Svetsky. Great episode, by the way. I love you too. And the way you guys riff, it's
Thank
awesome. You. Really, really fun. Listen to, and, so let's tell everybody who's listening, like coda, like, what does it mean? Like listening to cause you have such a unique perspective as a man and as a human. And so listening to your stories and I'm really, I want to read your whole memoir when it's out, what was that like for you, interpreting for your parents your whole life? So for the listeners who obviously haven't gotten a chance to listen to that episode, like give the listeners a peek of like, what does it mean to be coda? What do I say a coda? Is that correct?
Yeah. We keep the indefinite article.
Okay.
So CODA stands for Child of Deaf Adults. There's a recent movie out with Marley Matlin and others. It was run by Apple, and it won some Oscars. It's called CODA. I guess genius title. I didn't like the movie that much for a lot of reasons, but the actors were very good, and I think for people who have never heard of the story, it's a wonderful primer, right? So insofar as it's a primer, I recommend it, and I think you'll get a basic sense of the strange pressures of interpreting for your parents. And I guess one way to sum that up is it's sort of like being the parent to your parents. There's always going to be this gap of ignorance, inevitable gap where that you're always going to make up for. What's this? What's that? So your ears serve as kind of passive receiving of information. And when all you can do is see, you have such a narrow angle, a narrow view of the world. Quite literally, what's not in view does not exist. And your ears kind of fill up the data. They fill up your world outside of what you can see. And I think we take that for granted. So if you don't have that, everything is a surprise to you. That's outside of your vision. Everything is a mystery, particularly because most of the world speaks and doesn't sign. Conversations are a mystery. You only catch words here and there if you lip read. It's not really that accurate. So as a kid, you're spending all of this time engaging with your parents and dealing with giving them what they need. And fundamentally, I would say we're predictive beings. We try to guess at things, figure things out. And so you become very good at figuring out what your parents need before they need it. And I think that's actually a very universal premise, right? A lot of us as kids started to figure out what our parents needed before they needed it. There's just this very interesting twist, I suppose, when it comes to deafness, because that's an added layer of pressure. You have to be their ears all of the time. You have to be at their side often. And it's funny because I would say something like I probably spent more time, figuratively speaking, I don't know how figurative it is, but figuratively speaking, as a woman than as a man, in the sense that I spent a lot of time interpreting for my mom and had to adopt a kind of she had to be a very hard woman, like very strong to get through what she got through. And so she can have a masculine side of her that she lets out. So a masculine persona. And so it's this very weird, I was interpreting as a masculine woman, but not as a man, as a kid. And when you do that at such an age, at the age before you're really prepared to create an identity, to set yourself up, that causes a lot of conflict. Certain feminine traits start to crop up and the masculine traits don't crop up as naturally. And I think people forget that men have to learn how to be men. They're not born knowing how to be men. And so I didn't really have that model as much growing up. And that attachment was very difficult to work through. So I think that's kind of the opening. It's obviously everybody's got their own flavor of being a coda insofar as there are codas. I've heard a lot of stories. I've been very lucky to meet a lot of codas. And I think it's just the nature of that attachment is the same, but what results from the attachment, both because of character and because of the parent themselves and what they need, that all turns out to be a little different. But I think that's kind of the baseline. It was a lot of pressure.
Listen, when I was listening to your interview with Alex, it was, it's a whole new perspective for those of us who don't understand that world. And like you said, like the taking on the personas and the identities and not having an opportunity to really form your own because you're in this role of a responsible child. And that obviously leads to a lot of different configurations in your psyche, of who you are and who you're not and who can you be, and obviously our identity is a very important part of our behavior and who we become and how we think about things. And so if we identify as, Lux Luthor, the evil villain, we're going to embody Lux Luthor. If we embody, I want to be a hero, etc. But so it's like for you, it doesn't seem like you had that opportunity and you had to kind of conform to someone else's world. And so how did that, as you were growing up as a teenager into college and everything, it obviously led to a certain point in your life that we'll discuss. Like, how did you get from being this child, taking care of your parents, obviously navigating the system, and then getting to a place where it was like, what the fuck is going on here? That you got to a place where you thought leaving the world might be better?
Yeah, that's that's a rough story. Well, to start, I was building this interpreting company that's still around, and I was also in college. So I was in college for philosophy, and it was actually it was an intense curriculum. It was an intense program. We were dealing with ideas all day, very heady. And then there was this company that was working in more than one time zone, and I was operating the whole thing. And there were points where it was really struggling. And that was a lot of pressure. But I think those things are what's that line from Nietzsche? He who has a why can bear almost any how. I didn't
Mhm.
really have a why, right? I wasn't sure what exactly was going on. So
Yeah.
I was throwing myself into all this work, but it all felt futile. And, there were issues in terms of management dynamic. There were all kinds of things that were just piling up one after the other. And then I was in a dynamic with a girl at the time, and it's always interesting what people bring out of you, right? So this was, I guess what I'll say about the dynamic was that it was, I think it was a reflection of the kind of harshness that I was putting on myself. Sort of, it was externalizing this self treatment. So I was being overly giving, but getting very harsh feedback. Which there's something to that. I thought about that for a long time, and someone, as it happens, I might have been able to still carry on through all that. But what ended up happening was one girl actually committed suicide on campus. And it sort of created this ripple effect where several kids ended up attempting suicide. And I certainly had a struggle with that. Some friends had to dive in and get me out. And um, I try never to say sort of the exact details because I don't want anyone to sort of
Sure.
collect the ideas. But I'm very lucky to have had friends that came in at the right moment. And yeah, I just hit an upper limit in terms of what kind of emotional tension I was able to hold, how much of the world I could put on my shoulders without it being my shoulders or my world. So I think that's the biggest danger, right? So there is a virtue to a certain amount of selfishness, and I think there might be a surplus of selfishness in the world. I think most people should probably be more selfless. It seems to me, but there are also those who just keep giving and giving until they have nothing left, until they're worn down to a nub, and that doesn't seem so good either. So I mean, please feel free to press. I hope that's a good.
No, this is great. And
Yeah.
this is a tender subject. And I think, as we said before we hit live, mental health and the human spirit and its fragility and its strength at the same time are so important to have conversations about, because a lot of us, I, you know, we don't have conversations about raising your hand and asking for help, especially if you have been the caregiver for so many people in your life for so long, because you're used to being the superhero. You're used to being the badass. You're used to being, like you said, carrying everything on your shoulders and making sure everything's going okay. And so when we have to admit, like, holy shit, I don't have this together. And sometimes it overwhelms us to the point where it's like, I'm going to pull the plug because it's just going to relieve this pain and suffering in this unbearable heightened state of life. And so I've been there. And so today is actually my 6-year anniversary of living. And
I'm
I'm
really glad.
stoked. Like,
Yeah.
so last night, it's happened to be the night of Burning Man. 6 years ago, I was in a place of very dark despair and hopelessness and powerlessness and under-resourced everything. And I had tried to think I had it together for so long, and I'm the mom and I'm the wife and I'm a business person and all this. And it was just like, I got this. It's a funk. No worries. And I was like, I refused to ask for help because I was very, just ashamed that I wasn't able to go fix it all by myself. Like, I was the fixer in the world. And the fact that I couldn't help fix myself felt very lonely and scary. And I think a lot of people struggle with that. And if anybody's like listening to this right now and you think like, well, that can't happen to me because I'm a CEO or I'm a sports athlete or I'm, Anthony Bourdain or whoever, it's like every living organism has a breaking point. Everything. There's nothing in nature that doesn't have a breaking point. And with enough stress and pressure consistently or repetitively, things can collapse. And that goes for our minds and everything. So on your journey with your friends who helped
Okay.
you,
Just to jump
sorry,
in
go ahead.
before we hop there, yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
just so one thing I guess I think it's one thing to um, give all your strength to something and fail because you chose the project and it couldn't work out. I think that's one thing. I think it's another thing to feel caged, and it seems to me that most suicide happens because we feel caged,
Mm-hmm.
trapped in captivity.
Yeah.
And this is what if there's any one thing that I would say, it's something like this world that we live in is not real. It's pretty simulated. There are little games everywhere. Everything is an amusement. Love is made to be an amusement. Work is made to be an amusement. Nothing is too quote unquote stressful. Um, there's sort of these weird little fail safes for when you get old, and there are these little guardrails for when you're young, and those are all very dangerous, particularly for men. If I remember correctly, suicide is more common in men. I may be wrong about that, but I believe
No,
that's
the
the case.
attempts are more and the follow throughs are more for men.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. And I think there's a reason for that. It's because many men don't see where they can authentically express their power in a context. Nothing is real. So I guess it only makes things worse insofar as this world is actually a giant panopticon. If you go into the forest, you can still use your phone. You can still be found. You can't be lost. There's no longer any place where a person can have real stakes. And even if you're a criminal and you try to raise the stakes in some kind of dangerous way, there's still a system for you. There's still a prison system. You're still in this revolving door. You're never really out. So
Mm-hmm.
so I don't really have a solution to that except to suggest that, I mean, as if I'm master of this, but to say something like, insofar as the world can be laughed at or mocked,
Mm-hmm.
that is an authentic capacity. Like I can't remember where I heard this, but somebody said something like, laughter is just disguised contempt. Every form of laughter is disguised contempt, or even socially acceptably expressed or expressible contempt. And I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. There we go. Laughter.
I know, dude.
So,
I
yeah,
love the way that that feels correct because it's just like, oh, what the fuck over there, like and but it's like you don't take it as seriously, but you're still just like It's a good way to let that energy get released in the world.
yeah, exactly. Right. So it's there are like two elements here. One is laughter, and then the other is to find whatever the real risk is, right? When your heart beats and you're like, this makes me really nervous. That's probably the thing we should try and do. But I say this as someone who still lives in this world, right? It's kind of hard to speak about it from the outside. I don't live on the outside of it, so I guess that's just the best I'm able to do with what I have. And I think that humility is really necessary for something this sort of difficult and this dangerous to talk about. But
Yes.
as long as you see something real, then I think that's the only thing really that makes life worthwhile, that something was real
Yeah.
about it. Yeah.
Well, in the real, like, what do you define as real? Like your assignment of meaning toward something? Is it the why? Is it like, because we were taught, you had mentioned like if you don't have your why, Simon Sinek talks about, start with why, everything. So how do you define that? what is real and meaningful for you?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I love it because we only start to know what's real by playing. So kids play, kids create games, they create structures on their own without prompting if you let them. And they'll do things like play hide and seek, or they'll invent something with rules. They'll take a ball, they'll invent a game that's never been invented before. They'll start to talk in their own language if they want to. And this is all practice for intuitively, these things that are, sorry, do you hear that beeping?
I do.
Give me one sec.
It's okay.
Okay. So, it's all developing a kind of intuition for things that are in the world. And I think I'll just speak for men in this case specifically, that men are practicing for war. They like to play soldier often, right? There's a reason for that. They are practicing for death. They're practicing for conquering. They're practicing to kill. And war is always going to be, well, no, that's not true. War used to be real, not mechanized, not, there used to be this kind of, it used to be grounded in this very strange way. It wasn't like there were a bunch of people who decided they would send a bunch of soldiers to a country they've never seen to do an objective that makes no sense, to then leave them stranded there with no clear objective. So insofar as I think it's very hard to know what's real if we don't have a sense of how to play games. We don't know how to play. So I guess my answer to how do you know what's real or what is real is whatever greater goal or power emerges from a life of game playing has to be real. But I don't mean game playing like consuming. It's not a consumption issue. So if you've played video games your whole life, you've probably never really played. It's not the same playing.
Right.
I'm talking about real engagement with others, developing gradually over time stakes, winning and losing at hide and seek. There is genuine winning and losing in that because the game was set, because I've invested myself. I've willed myself into playing this game. So now I also will myself into the results of it. I can't suddenly break the game. I can't say I'm done playing this game. Nobody takes you seriously if you're a sore loser, right? I don't want to play. I throw the Monopoly board, whatever. Mm-hmm. So I guess that's my answer to that question.
On the men, circling back to the men preparing for battle, preparing for war, and then how it's changed right now. I'm curious your thoughts. Like, I wrote an article about Bitcoin and sperm consciousness, and I think about the consciousness of a sperm versus the consciousness of an egg, the divine feminine and the divine masculine. And I think about the energy of the man, the masculine, the sperm, is in this, like, I must battle against all you dudes, billions of y'all, so that I may survive. And in order to do so, I must push up against this thing called the egg, and I must be received, and I must win, And so it's that, obviously there's the physical act of male, female, and then there's the internal act of life being produced. And so I'd be curious about, the stifling of that ability as a man in this world to have things to push up against, literally. And like with the gaming thing, it's kind of this, like, cool, our imagination, we can push, we can expand. I wonder if has that been taken away because of all of this technology and all of the things where we're not, it doesn't have to just be physically pushing up against something, but it's not this digital kind of blah going on up here. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't believe it's technology per se. I think technology is neutral. And I mean, there's a whole other conversation we can have about what technology is master of us. I think we're slaves to it now, and there's nothing we can do to stop it. I think the bigger it gets, the more hands it needs on deck, and the more work we need to do to keep it alive. And I don't like where this is going, but we can talk about that. But I think it's just ultimately a question of captivity. I think men just feel like they're captives. And when you become a captive, you sort of bite, you're the fox, like you'll bite into your own arm to try to escape. And if you can't do that, suicide seems like the way out.
Yeah.
And then if all you've lived is a captive life, you're not gonna be willing to die, paradoxically. you're not going to be willing to die. You're not going to, if you want to chase the egg, you have to accept that you're probably going to die. You're probably not going to make it. And so what do men do when they're in captivity? They masturbate, right? The sperm goes nowhere. I go nowhere, the sperm goes nowhere. There's a real reason for that. So that's very much a kind of allegory for what captivity does to a man.
Yeah.
Nothing ends up having a goal, achieving its mission. It's all bitterness. So because you're not willing to die, or you're not even willing to understand what it might mean to die at the right time, you die at an arbitrary time. What's the difference between dying today, dying tomorrow, or dying 50 years from now?
Mm-hmm.
It's very tragic, right? I mean, this is a heavy thought, but I think that's why there's, laughter is a good outlet for this kind of pain of captivity. Insofar as you can't break out of it, but you can. You just, it just takes time and finding the way. But yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I really resonate with it for me too. At that time, it was a feeling of no way out, totally trapped, checkmate. Like I felt checkmated in my life. And I know that now that's obviously wasn't the correct perspective, but based on what was going on in my life, it was like that's what I felt like. And so for the human spirit to feel trapped and captive, like you said, it's not natural. And so we don't behave in a way that is in alignment with our highest selves. It's not in alignment with who we wish to be as humans and our identity, And so we definitely, it's important, I think, to know thyself, of course. I do this work with people and I talk about getting your MeHD, and I go through these 11 areas of life and I'm like, we're really going to understand ourselves like with a fine tooth comb, because a lot of us haven't taken the time to truly dive in. We think we do. We think we're introspective. We think we go do psychedelic journeys. We think we've done some therapy or some, things, but truly, truly taking the time to really understand your operating system and your unique, I call it your life, your 11X code. It's such a revelation because you really realize like, wow, this is really like who I am and who I'm not and what I want in my life and what I don't want. And then you recognize sometimes later in life, you're like, wow, why did I keep saying yes to this? And it's kind of a deal breaker for me as in my, my character or my dreams or my vision. And then you sort of end up in a contorted state of not being you. But you think like, okay, I'm surviving in this social world and I'm fitting in and I'm kind of doing the thing. And then it's like, I got to break free from this because it's not me. And so it's that knowing yourself in an authentic way and who you are and why you're here is so important. And I wonder because for you, this happened when you were younger in college, and what would you say to younger folks right now who might be listening to this, that might be feeling claustrophobic in their own lives?
There's there's a guy named Sadhguru, Sadhguru, and really great, forget, like an Indian sage. And I heard him talk about the difference between when you're meditating, when you're sitting cross-legged, the difference between your palms being down and your palms being up. And he said that when your palms are up, you can actually feel it, that your lung capacity is greater. And when your hands are down, your lung capacity is lesser, and that has an energetic difference. And he said something like, you're trying to drive a car, but you're driving it pressing on the clutch at very weird moments, and you're jerking and you're switching from gear to gear. And so I think, just to build on your point, it seems to me that the best advice that can be given to younger people is you have to learn about your body. What climate works for you? What's your diet? Indigestion ruins a whole day. How much
Mhm.
time do you need in the morning before you have to get started? Are you somebody who has even felt what it's like to be full of energy? Do you know what that's like? You know, the high school situation today, or just the schooling situation today, is very bleak
Mm.
insofar as public schools do their absolute best not to teach you anything. They work very hard at that. Um, I've seen it. Teachers just don't teach. So, so the raw, the raw collection of knowledge that we've lost, even how to clean a room, how to focus, how to pay attention to details, what to look for, how to, you know, even grounded questions like when is it the right time to be angry? When is laughter weird? When is it the right time to betray a friend? If ever, should you ever do that?
Mhm.
These are like, there are a million questions like that that you have to get out of the meme world, TikTok and others, I would say, and just really be able to sit with yourself and learn what your preferences are. It might actually take years just to find a diet that works for you. It might take years to find the right climate. It might take years to know whether, not just whether you're a city person or a forest person or a mountain person or a beach person, but what kind of neighborhood. There are neighborhoods in San Francisco that are totally disconnected from one another. We used to talk about this all the time. So, do you want to live south of Market, or just where do you want to be? And recognizing other people's energies and giving up on trying to change them. Frankly, there's a professor of mine once said, you never try to change other people's character. You're neither called to it nor able to do it. And then she said, don't even improve your own, just behave well. It was some
Mm.
of the best advice I ever got, right? She said things like, don't write letters where you dash the paper and it's not perforated on the side and it looks like a mess and your handwriting is bad. Dot every I, cross every T, do your job well. If you hate the job you're at, still do it well. Just because you hate it doesn't mean you get to be bad at it. If you're bad at the job you hate, you will be bad at the job you love, and then you'll never love anything.
Mm.
You know, it's it's all it's all very, I mean, I feel like the advice is remains very mundane, but it's because society doesn't really give us a genuine direction. I mean, who wants to work for, like, was your destiny really to work at an insurance company? I don't know. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. There's nothing wrong with insurance companies. I'm just saying that I don't know if our ancestors would like the idea of us having worked so hard to get here only so we could be part of a giant corporate Borg. I don't
Right.
know. Maybe not. But we have to give ourselves some inner goal, and it's not, I don't necessarily think it can be externally motivated. I don't think it's about making more money a year.
Yeah.
That's my gut. I'm not sure, but I think it really isn't about making more money or getting more ribbons or whatever it is. I think it's about, I hope it's about ordering our physiology in such a way that order naturally radiates from us
Mhm.
rather than disorder. So if you see disorder wherever you go, it's probably you. And if you see order wherever you go, that's also probably you.
Yeah.
And how can we shift that, go from one part of the spectrum to the other?
It will it layers into the Bitcoin ethos of personal responsibility, and really knowing, like, I have to manage this stuff myself if I wanna make sure that I'm holding my Bitcoin safely, or am I outsourcing this to a third party in the old kind of fiat way. And so I think, again, the consciousness of our old ways, of a lot of these outsourcing of, like, okay, well, someone else will fix me, and someone else will manage this for me, and someone else will do this thing. And it's all this externally oriented way of looking at life. And so a lot of, I think, maturity comes from when you really start owning, like, it's all me, and like when I go through this 11x thing with my clients, it's like, a lot of times we start with, like, oh, it's the divorce is his fault, or I lost my job because my boss is a jerk, or that professor didn't even see me, and then when you keep reverse engineering the dots of like, well, let's go back here and what happened here and what happened here. It always is you. It's you and how you're navigating. Are you sleeping well? How are you spending your time? What are you putting in your body? Who are you associating with? What's your environment feel like for you? All of those things that impact you, like you just said, right? Like we're creatures and we thrive in certain spaces, just like a palm tree probably wouldn't do that well here in the mountains where I live, right? You can't get mad at the palm tree. It's not designed to thrive in the mountains. And so we are that way as human, nature creatures, right? Like we thrive in certain environments and we kind of crumble in others. And it's up to us to understand, like, if I keep putting myself in this crumbling environment, I shall continue to crumble, So it's like understanding, like maybe it's my job to look at where I thrive and what feels aligned and lit up, and um what do you consider? How do you feel about that? Like with Bitcoin and that ethos of the personal responsibility, and today's Burning Man, they're burning the temple, and it's about letting go of all the old things and prayers for those who have passed on, etc. But Burning Man is also the ethos of radical personal responsibility. That's not like, yeah, I'm going to go to the concession stand out here and get stuff, or, oh, someone else is bringing the sound system or my tent. Every single thing is like, you bring your own life and make it possible. And so what would you say to that between Bitcoin, Burning Man, and just growing up, as humans?
Yeah, I love that. And I especially love it because when we put things back on ourselves, we start to recreate an ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
So what's great about Bitcoin is I'm starting to, I guess as I've sat in it, I would like to believe that as people get longer type preference and take their money upon themselves, begin to accept greater responsibility for not just their mistakes, but their actions broadly, their victories, their mistakes, their actions. Yeah, people forget if you don't take responsibility for your mistakes, you're probably not also taking responsibility for your victories either. It's really a two-way street. People forget that. So you get to take responsibility for both. Isn't that great? You get to take on the W's and the L's.
Yeah.
And so you do that, and then what I hope ends up happening is we start to need things like therapists less, not because therapists are bad, but because family ends up taking that responsibility on again. And we start to need matchmakers less, not because matchmakers are bad, but because family starts to find people within the network again, right? Just as a sort of monetary network. I mean, it's funny, I laugh about this. I wonder if Marx was at least partly right about this, that your economics starts to define your culture and your politics. I have a lot of back and forth about that. I've said before that I actually think that culture and economics are very intertwined, particularly in the modern world.
Mm-hmm.
And so I might just say that they're intertwined. And so as we build one more proper ecosystem, maybe the other will respond in kind. And we won't have this kind of atomized, individualistic, delegate to everything to everyone else life that we have today.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I agree completely. One other thing, if I may, actually, this comes to mind. I know it's tangential, but I wanted to say it, which is Nietzsche has this great line about how the thought of suicide gets a person through many nights.
Mm-hmm.
That this is one other piece of advice I might give to somebody who's younger is don't be afraid of the thought, be afraid of the action. And sometimes the thought is actually what gives you the chance to reassess, or even is a warning sign to you that something is not working. It's like a giant red alarm bell.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody you're with makes you think suicidal thoughts, you might ask yourself, like, okay, I'm responsible for these thoughts, but there is a stimulus here that's making me feel this way.
Yeah.
If I remove the stimulus, what happens? If I back away from the stimulus, if I go further toward the stimulus, what do the thoughts intensify? Do they, right? See it kind of like see it kind of like what is it? One of those things that looks for metal, like gold in the ground. Those little
Oh yeah,
metal
the
detectors.
metal
Yeah,
detectors. Yeah.
yeah. So when a thought starts going off like that, blinking, it might be arbitrary. You might be totally disconnected from the thought, like, oh, that's a random thought. So, maybe because I spent a lot of time in this room and this room has a lot of heavy energy for me historically, that thought comes to mind. Well, that's not a big deal. But maybe it's really a deeper problem. Like this person I say I'm in love with makes me feel this way.
Hmm.
Well, we should look into that a little bit more. So, yeah,
Are you
that's
familiar with nonviolent communication and
NVC for
Yeah.
sure, for sure.
So something, because listening to the way you're, a couple of the words arrangements that you had said, and I still have to check myself a lot because it's like, you made me feel this way, or you hurt my feelings, or, the thing. And what I learned when I was studying um, NVC was the like, I feel blank when blank. And so that really helped me shift my power from external to internal and my responsibility from external to internal. So if like my daughter, my wonderful teenage daughter, who's my blessing, but she's a teenager and it's difficult sometimes to have the mother-daughter teenager thing. And so sometimes I'm like, oh, she's irritating me, or she's this and that. And I'm like, no, Mama Val, like you feel irritated when this happens. And so it helps me remember like to take my own power back for my responsibility of how I'm feeling, instead of, because I feel like if I use those other words in that way, I'm giving my power to her or to anybody in the world, And of course, she's not trying to, she's just being her, And so I feel like our words matter so much. I mean, they're the programs of what we feel and what in the response to what's feeling in our system, in our neuro, biology, and then it turns into our actions, and then our actions turn into habits that turn into our character in our life. Um, what do you say to that with like helping people remember about how to have the self-talk, and the self-corrective mechanism of awareness of what's going on in our minds, and be like, is this really true? And like any processes that you go through to help like analyze things to get you to a place of neutrality or more inner peace if you're having some spin go on. I don't know if that question makes sense. It's a long
No, it does. Although for me, I think the most valuable work that I do, the greatest ROI
one. Hmm.
exercise, as it were, that I get is actually writing multiple autobiographies of my own life.
Whoa.
Yes. So here's what's great is your life is up for interpretation.
Hmm.
It's already gone. You've already lived up to this point. So you can actually you can see yourself as a victim of circumstance, or you can see yourself as somebody who's very powerful, or you can come up with all kinds of creative ways, and you can make very small events very large. You can
Hmm.
make large events very small, and that's really the power of art, right? Is getting at the truth by lying. And I love that very much. So by taking a tiny event and really enlarging it, it wasn't that large at the time, almost
Hmm.
certainly, but because you're able to recreate your life, reshape your life from your own vantage point, from your vantage point now, you can actually glean some insight from this small thing, like eating a blueberry at a coffee shop. The weather was a certain way, and suddenly, I don't know, this movement of a dress made you feel a certain thing that ended up being the seed for some very large phenomenon later. The kind of stuff that comes straight out of a Tolstoy novel, or a Dostoevsky novel, as a matter of fact. And so those are, you know, write 5 autobiographies of yourself that
Hmm.
are 5 pages each, totally different. One this way, one that way, one this way, one that way. And try to borrow from the feeling, like try to transform, try to have a try to emphasize a particular feeling when you're building this story. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. That you want the story to reflect what a certain feeling of a certain kind. So the victim feeling, write that out. Write the life that way. The feeling of power, write it out that way. So do your work, do the best you can to reach that feeling so that it organically comes out onto the page, so that it's not forced, and see how different you can be. And I think when you realize that you're malleable in that way, you're not infinitely malleable, but you are malleable, then the smaller things like these helpful tactics of, when you do this, I feel this, or I feel this when X happens, start to become easier. You start to see a natural emergence between a separation between you and yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? Which is really where you're trying to get to. So this
That's,
autobiography is a very easy way to do that. You're separate from your history. You can shape it. You can reinvent it. You can even write an autobiography that never happened. How did I get here? I was looking for the murderer of my sister. Insert, long tangent here. Why not? I was a pilot for 5 years, and then, I did it with my ex-wife. Like, I don't know. I mean, none of that happened to me. So there is a kind of joy in realizing that, you don't even have to be captive to who you've been. There's nothing holding you.
exactly. And the power of writing your own story now so that it rewrites your history is ultra powerful, I believe. And I'm working on a book. I've been working on it for 6 years called Snap Goes the Mommy. And it's about obviously this whole journey. And, I get a lot of stuff done and then I put it on the shelf and I'm like, so it's definitely a long process. But what do you think about, because as you were talking, I was getting inspired because just last night I was like, I always wanted to write something from the perspective of my dog, and like, what's it like to be around this woman, And so as you were writing it, talking about the different autobiographies, I was like, what would it be like if you wrote, like you said, maybe 5 autobiographies from the perspective of your dog, or maybe the perspective of your underwear, or the perspective of the street lamp down the way because it always sees you doing something when you're going for your walk, or whatever it is, and like, what would it look like to look at your life from these other lenses, and get really weird and creative, like the butterfly that always lands on your deck, or I think that could be so fun and creative and like limitless, right? You could go forever, and then you get to design who you are from these different angles, and think about like, oh, right, the butterfly sees me as somebody who's chill, having some tea at 2 o'clock in the afternoon every day or whatever, and instead of, oh my gosh, I'm frazzled and I'm this person in your own head, you can, I don't know. What do you think about that?
I have a lot of thoughts that. Give me just 1 second.
Totally. Yay. I'm definitely loving this conversation with Robert and appreciating the time on a Sunday afternoon to discuss these very important things. For those of you guys listening on any live stream and the podcast, take an inhale with me right now while we're taking a little break. And just remember, like, you can always reassess where you are and change your course in this very moment. You can take a breath and inhale love right now. And exhale peace. And I'm a sailor, everybody. And so I was told if you trade like just 1 degree your course, obviously over the period of a long time, you'll end up in a completely different direction. And so you can do that in this moment if you choose to. So I always like talking about that stuff because I think people like you, we were talking about the old story, right? And you think like, well, that's me. I guess this defines who I am. It's like, you can change that in this moment. Like you said, Robert, about writing your autobiography. So let's circle back to the different perspectives for the autobiographies.
Yeah. Actually, one of the first thought that came to mind about this butterfly was that from the point of view of a butterfly, you live forever.
Right.
You're actually an eternal creature. So it lives for how long? 1 day, 3 days, and it lives out this whole life, right? Your whole life in 3 days, birth to death. and it sees you, whatever, we'll just say 3 mornings in a row drinking the same cup of coffee, and it says this being never leaves this space, right? There's something about, I mean, we say life is short. It obviously is, or it feels that way, and yet it's nice to get a sense of how short or long it really is relative to other things, because what is short and what is long anyway.
Right.
So relative to a mountain, we think it never moves, but certainly if you look at a craggy mountain and you look at a smoothed over one, you know that one spent millions of years being eroded and one didn't.
Yeah.
Still young and another one's older. So what the butterfly sees, how the butterfly sees us, is sort of how we see mountains, and
Mm.
maybe there's some kind of peace in that, some sentiment in that can bring us a kind of reassurance.
Well, I love you bring up the relativity point, because everything is relative based on where you're looking at it from, right? And just like you had said earlier about when you get really close to something, it can seem like really big and prominent and scary, and if you take a lot of steps back or go up or look, it's kind of like, well, that's not that big of a deal. And you can assign meaning to that based on your kind of going in and out of things with that perspective. And so when you're in like this tunnel vision of your life because you're experiencing heightened sensations, trauma, the trappedness, whatever, it can seem very scary and overwhelming. And if you decide like, whoa, I'm going to take a breath. I'm going to take a step back. Okay. Is this going to matter to me in a day? Is this going to matter to me in a year? Is this thing going to be as big of a problem to me in 5 years? The week of my death, is this going to matter to me? On my deathbed, if I know I have an hour left, is this thing that I think is so fucking big gonna be that big? And I think when you can do those little experiments, it can help your nervous system kind of get recentered and be like, Yeah, okay, I do have to attend to the thing, but it's not the end of the world. It's going to be okay." And so pausing, giving yourself that permission to pause. And it's hard, when you're triggered and you got the chemicals going on all over the place. It's not always easy to just be like, okay, I'm going to start now, allow a pause, start now, align progress and peace, etc., all the things. And so it takes practice on a daily basis, to be the master of your mind, because it goes all over the place because it's reacting to these energetic biochemical things happening with us. So, do you have a certain practice that you do? You talk about meditation, you talked about Guru. Like, if you ever feel like you're getting in a position of the trapped vibe, like if that inkling kind of comes up, do you have something that you're like, okay, Robert, let's kind of go 1, 2, 3 and make sure we're not going to go down this path again?
I mean, speaking honestly, I'm still working on it. I think do I have a practice? I should have a more consistent practice. I think just being able to, if you can't meditate, I don't necessarily like to sit still. If you can't meditate, walk. So I guess daily I walk. I think my best
Mhm.
thoughts come when walking, for sure. Um, there was something I was going to say, but it slipped my mind. But I think yeah, at least walking.
Walking's
Yeah.
important. And, yeah, it moving your body and moving the energy around. I know Steve Jobs used to go for walks all the time and had his best meetings and ideas coming from that. I think and I love what you said, like, you're still working on it. And the reality is of every human and anyone who's listening to that, like, you're never gonna be there wherever there is, because 'cause you're here, and we're always working on it, the presence practice, the power practice, your inner peace practice. There's no real destination. It really is this journey. And so I would just invite people to remember, like, don't be hard on yourself if you don't have something, because even like the best teachers are always learning and refining what works for them based on, oh, wow, look, I'm at this cycle of life, and what used to work for me at this cycle of life isn't necessarily the right appropriate practice for me now, because this is what feels more aligned, And so, what would you say to young people who are hard on themselves for not having all the answers right now?
Don't be. Although,
Don't be, dude.
I have that problem too. I guess so one thing that comes to mind is if you don't obey yourself, you'll be commanded by someone else.
Mm,
And it's
preach, brother.
yeah, right. And it's much harder to it's much easier to feel bad about yourself if you're being commanded by someone else, because deep down it's not you. At least if it's you, you can own it. There are those people who have their lives that are a total mess, but they don't really care because they made all the decisions and they don't really regret it. You can, you meet those people, and then you meet people who regret, I shouldn't have done this, I shouldn't have done that. But what they really regret is not the action, but the fact that they didn't listen to themselves in doing the action. They regret that they heard somebody else tell them what to do and they took that advice. And it would even be better to make the same dumb mistake 10 times and it was yours, and then it clicks that came from some previous experience that taught you the wrong way. Once you make that connection, that stuff all melts away. You're like, okay, that was me. I get what happened. I forgive myself. I understand it. And then there's this kind of relief. Weight off your chest starts to disappear because finally it no longer has control over you. So I guess that's one thing I would try to suggest, is find the places where there's control over you and get rid of them as much as possible.
Wow, this is good. Okay, the control over you part, that's a big one, and I think a lot of us as rebels were like, you can't tell me what to do, and having that inner self-control it's a practice again, like you said. And so I feel like there is a shift that's happening with that. Again, it's that maturity shift of going into like, this is my responsibility. And so when you can get out of that victim mindset that someone else is doing something, or it's the government, or it's this, whatever, it's a new way of approaching your life, and it does have that, whoa, this is a lot of responsibility, because we might be operating from an old paradigm of like, okay, it's my mom's fault, or it's, Biden or whatever, and then when we start pulling that back in, then it's like, whoa, all of these things are mine. And you said something that I think is one of the most important things for humans to remember is self-forgiveness. And I think a lot of us, we self-flagellate. We beat ourselves up a lot when we make mistakes. And so instead of having that beginner's mind, right, where it's like, I'm just here to learn. I'm just here every day. Something new is going to happen. I don't know. It's difficult because we want that sense of security and certainty, with thinking that we know and thinking that we really can control all these other things. But when you have that curious, open mind, then you can go make those mistakes and not be so hard on yourself. But if you kind of beat yourself up and you're self-judging, then you get that shame, and then it can turn into this weird soup. What do you say to like practice the art of I call it, like, Hawaiians, it's ho'oponopono, the practice of forgiveness, and it's a process, and it's 4 steps, super easy. I love you. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. And sometimes people put I love you at the end, but I always start with I love you. And doing that with ourselves, a lot of times people do it with each other if they have a breakdown, but like, oh, wow, I can do that to myself. Like, okay, I can be forgiven, and I'm not a bad human because I made some mistakes, and I'm not inferior or worthless or any of those things that we think that we want to beat ourselves up with. What do you say to that?
I mean, I agree with it totally. Yeah. I mean, you're on the money. Maybe part of what makes it so hard to forgive is that I think a lot of us have this This is Nietzsche again. Sometimes I'm just a walking Nietzsche commentary.
I love
And right,
it.
really, I mean, if you get good at one philosopher, two philosophers, it can change your whole life, right? Because or Shakespeare. I mean, memorize the classics. Memorize something in the classics, because you're going to pull back from it even when you didn't understand it your first, second, third, fourth read through. And as you go through life, it starts to clarify itself to you. If you etch something into your heart, it'll always refer back. If it's on your bookshelf and you forget about it, it really means nothing. Don't, who cares how many books you have? How many have you memorized? How many are in you? Um, Shakespeare is enough, by the way. You don't really need Nietzsche. You can do it with Shakespeare alone. So, so Nietzsche says something like there are multiple virtues inside a person. That is to say, there are multiple animals or people fighting over each other for control, or for domination. And the best way to live, or the way to get through all of this, I mean, part of forgiveness is like, oh, it's not just that people have control over you, but also this side of me feels away and this side of me feels away, and they get into a fight. And then you can't really forgive in such a case, because who's forgiving who? Who's winning? Who's winning in you? And if there are four of them, I mean, oh my God, forget about it, right? Then, I mean, what do you do? So, he says the goal is to make one the master of them all, one type. Because in the end, you're not a democracy. You can't survive as a democracy. You have to be a tyranny of some kind. Something in you has to say, this is the person I am. This is how I'm going to do it. These are my flaws. These are my virtues. I'm done. I'm just going to live out my life this way. And I think, you ask, well, what does that look like? What does that mean? Well, autobiography writing kind of helps you get a sense of what that could be. What are your virtues? What are your flaws? And are they even compatible? And which ones are, which ones aren't? You may have to make certain sacrifices within yourself as to who you want to be and who you don't. Mm-hmm. You may have a desire to be sort of leisurely, and then you may have a desire to be highly ambitious. Those actually may be in conflict with one another. And it's not just something like, well, sometimes I'm ambitious and no, I mean, you might actually feel guilty when you're ambitious and feel guilty when you're at leisure. And it might not be just a question of bad thinking. It might actually be fundamental. These are two parts of me fighting at war all the time. One always wants to be this way. One always wants to be that way, or one mostly wants to be this way. Right. So it's not just ambition, recovery ambition, or leisure, break the leisure again. Those are two fundamentally incompatible ways of living. I have to decide which one I want to be, and let one be tyrant. That's just a very rough, shallow example. I think there are many more fundamental ones, but I just want to give kind of a model, a picture of what I'm talking about, and trying to get to the bottom of what you are, and just becoming that. It's not easy.
It's not easy. And, bringing up the point of the internal voices, I always think about, like, who's holding the mic, inside your head, right? And you're playing karaoke, like, pass the mic over here. I interviewed, do you know who Sama is? Sama Katharo. So he has a podcast called Bitcoin Consciousness. It's a great podcast. But I got to interview him, and I was listening to, he gave an analogy of, like, what's going on inside here is like a mixing board. It's not just the mic, but it's like you've got all these multi-channels going on, and multi channels, not just these voices, but the stimulation, etc. And so he's like, when you become the observer, you can, like, decide, like, which channels are going to get the volume up and turned down, etc., and how are you going to blend these together. And so I liked that analogy, because there really is a time and a place. Certainly there's the whole mixing board is the whole, right? That's us. And so there is a time and a place for me personally. It's like, okay, I'm this, badass mom. I can go do all these things. And there's other times where I'm like, I'm actually just kind of tender right now, and I need a hug. And I'm not the one who's the caregiver. And I don't want that piece of, this is over here. I'm the one that wants the hug. And that I think of it like a lava lamp. You're dancing through, like, the formation of this thing here, and then it goes and fills in this space, but it's still all in this unit of the lamp of going through there. And so I wonder about, like, that one, Do you relate with all those voices and dancing back and forth? Because what I'm hearing you say is like, pick the one voice and that's it kind of thing. Like, and I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
That's hard. I think it is. I think there's a time for exploring probably, and a time for deciding.
Mhm.
I mean, don't take me as being an authority on this person, necessarily, but I guess that's where I would settle. I would say you have to know what the voices are. You have
Yeah.
to know what the impulse is, where the impulse is from, and you want to look for the one that gives you the greatest feeling of power. And you may have never felt that before. So you're going to have to, if you've always been sitting with that weakening, draining voice, and you
Mhm.
start to notice this thing I do drains me. This thing is neutral. You want to go towards the neutral, and then eventually you're going to look for something better. Well, the neutral is no longer satisfying me. Now I want something that's more powerful. And
Mhm.
I especially notice this when I'm setting boundaries and enforcing boundaries. There's a part of me that wants to be weaker, and that feels draining. It just feels lesser. There's a hollower spot where my heart used to be, right?
Mhm.
And then if I keep the boundary, I keep my heart, right? It's it's there, and that doesn't always feel as great in another part of my body. For example, like my gut might need to catch up, so my heart feels stronger, but my gut needs to catch up. But fundamentally, as a composition, as a whole being, I feel more aligned when my heart is aligned, for example. So you kind of have to do a lot of scientific method. When
Yeah.
I do this, what happens? When I do that, what happens? I notice this, I notice that. And there's a lot of waste. I mean, that's the biggest thing. There's a lot of waste, a lot of time wasted. You're going to throw away, hours and hours, days and days, years and years, just trying to figure out what happens here, what happens there, this new situation, that new situation. And sometimes you're getting challenged all at once and you're not prepared because you're still physiologically out of order. But that's, I think, in the end you do end up deciding, or you do incline towards saying, this voice doesn't work, that voice doesn't work, I don't want to dance, I just want to, I want to dance with this one person, and that's it.
Yeah.
I obey them totally. I have total subservience, total obedience. And that's, being a soldier has its advantages.
Totally. Well, what would you say to this? It's like this when I kind of reconstructed this like 11x model and this framework that um I do, like, there's all these disparate parts of our lives and segments of our life, our time, our money, our different types of relationships, our body, etc., our mission. Like, I realized, like, for me, when I looked at like the shit show mess of my life 6 years ago, it's like, what happened? How do I analyze what went wrong? How do I, look forward to make sure I don't do that lesson? I don't want to learn that lesson again. Um, but one thing I recognized was the center point of my life. And I never used to use the word God. It was like, like, don't, that's not my jam. I'm like, the universe, the thing, the source, the one, but I never used that word. I was allergic to it for almost 50 years. And but what I started recognizing is when I started reverse engineering and looking at all these parts of my life, I was like, wow, what if I would have made the decision through the lens of that highest power of infinity, God, love, spirit, universe, whatever. And I'm like, what if I would have used that voice as my navigator, and as my light shiner? And so I started realizing, like, wow, every one of these decisions that I was making, if I were making it with that voice holding the microphone, I could have felt more empowered, safer, more in alignment, more me, authentic, and so that was sort of my turning point to realize, like, that's all the voices, but it's the highest voice, and it's pure. It's like pure signal, and so how does that resonate with you for your voice, your one voice?
Do you think that voice comes from outside or inside?
I think it comes from a connection inside to it's like this. I think of my chakras and this energy system going into the universe, and I'm still learning, and I don't know, I'm learning through experience, and I'm learning through reading and talking with people and teaching and everything. But there's this intuitive voice. Like, if some people use the word intuition, instinct, it's something that lives within me, and it's connected to everything around me. It's connected to the oneness of infinity, and I think of, like, psychedelics, have helped me heal a lot and have helped me grow a lot. And when I've had different psychedelic journeys, um, there's that connection, that union with the all. But I'm still like a little holographic dot, but I have everything in me too at the same time. And so when I can remember again to change my perspective and approach my um, the voice from that, then I feel like, oh, right, I am connected to everything now and forever. And when I tune into that radio station, then I'm getting pure signal. But it's a practice, because it's not something that comes. I have to undo a lot of the old programs and the old behaviors. Um, so yeah, that's pretty powerful for me. And I know we talked a little bit about psychedelics when we met. So what's your vibe on that? Like, with your voice and your experience with psychedelics, and uh, finding that true signal.
Yeah, well, I'll say that psychedelics both gave me the worst night of my life and probably the best night of my life, insofar as you can use the words both worst and best, although maybe both nights were equally profound and needed one another just as much.
Mhm.
I've sat 11 times with ayahuasca and a few times with um, shrooms, magic mushrooms, I suppose. Uh, I get along with ayahuasca much better. Um, yeah, I think. I mean, you're certainly right that it's a practice, and it's very hard to keep up that practice coming back. I think it gets exponentially harder the farther away you are from that experience.
Mhm.
But yeah, I would. I mean, I I would like to say that I've tuned into that all signal station. I think when it's been a few years now, so I think being this far away, it's hard to keep it in view. It's pretty murky for me these days. I would like it not to be. I wonder what you do to keep that practice so that that signal is very clear. But
Mhm.
it sounds intuitively like like you're right that I guess whether it's quote unquote internal or external, I don't even know if those are the right words, but
Mhm.
whether it's in what way you interact with the world to find that signal, that's sort of beside the point, and the practice matters more. And however that whatever the mechanisms are, you can find it, and then you can use it, borrow from it to live your life out, however that is, and then love your life however it plays out, which is another thing. I think people are very attached to outcome.
Totally.
So
That's a big one. I know a lot of us, we get like, well, the Buddhist pain, suffering comes from attachment, right? And it's like we are attached to the old. We want to keep it the same. We're attached to this new outcome that we think it's supposed to be this way. And, we should on ourselves, like, I should do this or I should have done that. And it causes a lot of suffering for real. Um, the, the practice of tuning back into the signal, for me personally, like, I meditate, I journal, I pray, I chant every single day. And something that for me, because I have a hard time sitting still too. I'm not like I want to sit here and be all still like Sadhguru, but I do it with singing. And what I've found is the music that I've listened to on the journeys that I've done, when I listen to it again every day, and because the journeys are obviously long, um, it puts me back, it clicks something into my radio station, and it allows me to like tune into that signal. You know what I mean? And it's just sort of something that's like, oh, right. I remember when this was happening in the song, this was going on in the journey, and I was feeling expanded, or I was feeling safe, or I was feeling just at peace or at ease or whatever it was, or excited. And so I don't have to necessarily take any more medicine to get me there. The music is the medicine. I have a little phrase, the music is the medicine and the DJ is the doctor, you know, and everybody's their own DJ, right? But for me, that's a tool that works for my being, you know, because I love music and I love vibration of sounds, you know. Um, have you tried anything like that or thought about any, like, did you have certain music maybe that you were listening to that you recall, like any Icaros from the ayahuasca?
I never brought back any Icaros, but they were, I wish I had. I wish we had brought some of them back. They were great. Yeah, I mean, I think maybe partly because of my background. This is, some codas do get into music anyway. I was very late to the music scene. I didn't really know of very many songs. I didn't know what a genre was. I didn't know what an album was until high school.
Mhm.
So that gives you a sense of just how detached I was from this universe of music. I didn't even really know what it was, or, what the whole space was. So I came into it very late, and I think that might have affected kind of. I was very open, I was very open minded with music. It had been always there in maybe malls or I don't know, at friends' parties, but I was never really listening. And then I started to listen, and so maybe this is a good indicator for me to develop a new practice with music in mind. I like this idea, sitting with
Yeah,
it.
if it calls you, you know, I think it's interesting because you get just something sparks when it sparks, right? Like, I remember when my ex and I, we were in Tahoe, and I practiced yoga and I was doing all this stuff, you know, 20 years ago, and we went to some chanting thing, and he brought me there, and everybody's chanting and they're doing all this stuff, and I was like, "Get me the fuck out of here. Like, this is a cult. Bleh, like, no way." And so I literally walked out in the middle of the thing and left him there, and I was, you know, waited in the car, and I'm just like, "This is not my jam." And I just felt really like, ew, like, not good, you know? And for a while, I carried that, like, cult, "Ew, this is not good." There's mind control and the call and response chanting thing, and it was just like, "Mm-mm, I don't trust you. I don't know who you are. You're not getting up here in this little noggin of mine." And, you know, and that I carried that resistance for years, and for some reason, that triggered something in me, and I don't know why. I mean, I was a DJ and I played music, but this kind of chanting stuff was really, something wasn't right. And, um fast forward to, uh, I was at an AR conference a few years ago. Well, it was 6 years ago. It was like, well, 5.5 years ago. And I had just kept having all these magical synchronicities. And this woman, she was like, "Do you want to go to a David Pramel concert with me?" And I was just like, "I don't know who that is." And she's just like, it's chanting and it's pretty." And I was like, I don't know, dude. Like, I went to one of those chanting things before. And she was like, "Well, okay, whatever. I'll see you later." And then I ran into her later as the conference was letting out. And I'm like, "You know what? I have a hall pass from my kids for a couple of days. I'll go with you." And it was up in Oakland. And I'm just like, we get to the theater. I think it was like a Masonic temple or something up there. I believe I think it was in Oakland. It might have been San Francisco, but it was gorgeous, you know. You go in, there's all these people, and, you know, David Pramal and Mitan, her man, and Manus were playing this little trio, and they were projecting all this stuff, and it was like set and setting was just epic, and it felt like love and God was in the room, and everybody was singing, and it didn't feel like culty. And there was something different about that experience that my heart just went like, whew. And I mean, I ended up crying for half of the time and singing. And I was like, this is so beautiful. Like, I didn't know this was here, you know? And so that was in my mid 40s, you know, when that kind of opening of the musical vibration hit me. And so when I did an Ibogaine journey, and I made this giant long playlist for it. And of course, some of her music and all this other chanting music that I've been listening to. So every time I have my morning practice and I'm listening to that now, it brings me back to that ibogaine journey of healing and trauma repair and all the things that I got to experience with that. So it's never too late to have that awakening. And you never know, it might have to go a couple different times or angles till something like, gets that spark that says, oh, wow, this is the thing here. This feels right, And so I would just offer that for you and the listeners, maybe.
I love that. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah. One thing you said a few minutes back about Buddhism, right? That attachment causes pain and suffering.
Mm-hmm.
I've thought about this, and my current conclusion is something like attachment causes pain and suffering, and then it seems to me that most of us simply want not to suffer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And yeah, right. So
avoid the sensation of pain and suffering.
Yeah.
Ah!
Right.
Oh my God,
it's not going to fly well. Yeah. So it's, I think there is Buddhism wants to create, this is the thing, right? That we have to be careful about sort of the modalities of being human. That is to say, Buddhism wants to create a very certain type of person, the Christian still another, and the Jew still another, and so on. And the Japanese still another. And you can see how different they are based on kinds of people that live in those places, the cultures that are born from them. And so we have to be very cognizant, it seems to me, about what person we want to become. Do we want to be a person who's really inclined towards the Buddha, total detachment? I mean, there is something very, I would say this, that I think for most of us born in a materialist culture, Buddhism is very hygienic. It's a very good thing. We're way over attached to everything. Terrible. Mm-hmm. So at the very least, cutting a bunch of cords is very good. But then I would say something like, there may be a moment when you wake up and you say, no, turn the attachment up, turn the pain and suffering up. That's a much better way I want, that's a way I want to live. So in that case, you'd be more Greek, ancient Greek, than you would Buddhist. You would be saying something like, I want to attach myself to the pain of having children. No epidurals, none of that. I want to go all the way through labor, no IV drip. And then you would say the pain seems unbearable as a guy, right? It looks like it's insane. But
it's insane, dude.
It's insane. Right. And this is a really great comment that Nietzsche made. I think this is my last time I'm going to say Nietzsche. And then
it's okay. Don't worry. You Nietzsche it up, baby.
Yeah, right, for sure. So he says something like, the Greek women took the suffering of labor and birth as one more reason to do it. The pain was justification. The pain was a catalyst for the doing of it. If it was painless, it wasn't interesting. And it wasn't self-flagellation. It was this understanding that in order to create more order, to fight against the entropic forces of our world, you have to experience tremendous pain.
Yeah.
Tremendous pain. To build the pyramids takes backbreaking labor. There is no other way. It is not going to be seamless. So we have to conclude that there is a kind of, there might even be stages to this. That is to say that you might want to really consider, in this very abstract way, something like removing the vast majority of your attachments and then seeing what sticks, what's left at the end of that. And then the next challenge is to actually start to grapple with real pain and to turn it up and to fall in love with it and to be able to catalyze and digest it into joy, right? You don't want to experience this deep indigestion, which I think suicide is ultimately indigestion of the soul. It's indigestion of pain. In other words, it might actually literally be indigestion. You might have suicidal thoughts because you have IBS. I don't know. For all
Right.
I know, irritable bowel syndrome might just drive you so crazy that it screws up the whole rest of your physiology, and then suicide becomes a thought. That
Right.
is not hyperbole, by the way. I'm not exaggerating. I really believe that there are phenomena like that. That
Absolutely.
you ate the wrong thing, suddenly your body is haywire. I really believe this, and so we really undervalue those things. It's not just the content of the thoughts themselves. We can have a suicidal thought and laugh about it. Why do we cling to it? What's our reaction? And that's partly emotional, that's partly physical, right? And again, the emotional is the physical. I'm not trying to make a distinction there. I'm just saying,
Mhm.
what you eat matters. Those things matter. If food is medicine, if it's good food. So that's another thing, right? So if the goal is to we'll just say it this way, feel your feelings to the very maximum extent, and then to embody those feelings, and then to catalyze them into something greater in such a way that sadness becomes another way to gain more power, or anger becomes another way to gain more power, or grief becomes another way to gain more power, and then joy, of course, becomes another way to gain more power. Then you start to accumulate a kind of, not just currency with yourself, because there's full trust, and you've totally realigned yourself with your instinct, which is the hardest thing to do. But it seems to be one of the hardest things to do. Maybe love is harder. To love another is harder, and to love the world is harder still. But or both are, who knows which one. But then you start to put together your ability to deal with pain is also your ability to hold responsibility that
Mhm.
you own and you're willing to go through with. And you need all your strength to deal with something like birth, it seems to me.
Mhm.
So that's a worthwhile life, is just to try at that, to
I agree.
challenge and be challenged. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
well, I've got so many notes. I'm like commenting, right? Like I want to like go back to all the things. Like, okay, the elimination diet, right? You were talking about removing some things and then figuring that out. That mindset of whether it's with your food, doing an elimination diet, and same thing with things in your life, so that you can kind of have that spaciousness to be like, what am I going to put here next intentionally? What am I going to pull in? The IBS comment in like, as a woman who's gone through a lot of hormonal stuff, and I'm in menopause or postmenopausal now. When all this stuff was going on, my whole hormone, I was perimenopausal, and dude, didn't know I was perimenopausal. I didn't know all of these things could completely haywire my thinking and all of it. And so whether it's our food, whether it's our hormones, again, whether it's all these things in our life, it's kind of like we really have to know what's going on and understand that this is a system. Our body, our lives, the external and the internal, impact each other. And so know thyself, super important. The sensation of being uncomfortable, the sensation of pain in this modern society, we are unfortunately being programmed to instantly medicate and relieve that pain and relieve that discomfort. So whether it's like, oh, you've got a new message, dopamine, 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 and get rid of that feeling of anxiety of like, I can't leave an unopened Snapchat. Like the programming that these children are dealing with right now, we don't have a sense of what's going on for their developing minds, because every little thing is pain relief, pain relief, pain relief, versus I'm going to sit here with the discomfort of not alleviating that very quickly and getting on the social media and trying to make that go away. And so what do you say to, like, how do we help feel, because when you're in a position of pain, discomfort, feeling trapped, you know, it can spin out of control, especially if you've got all this other variables going on at the same time. So again, it's that pause, and it's like, what am I really feeling? Is it really pain? Like, is it a bear eating my arm off and it's truly a pain signal to my brain? Or is it a perceived pain because of something else that might be going on? And so it's like, how do we start to take that dissection of knowing ourselves and being okay with is this pain going to kill me? Like, is this something that is a life-threatening pain? You know?
I even think it's more foundational than that, in the sense that we are basically matchsticks
Mm.
being, we get a stimulus, and our thoughts only exist because a stimulus caused it in us, provoked it in us. I mean,
Mhm.
many of us have never actually had an organic thought come from ourselves, not just because very overwhelming stimuli prompted it. So, like there's something about the pace of nature where you sit and you watch a spider for 7 hours, and you actually don't have very many thoughts, right? You're just watching the spider. And I've gotten to do that, and that's a very interesting thing, where you're not even eating, you're not even really drinking. There's no real update on your life. Nothing is happening. The sun moves very slowly, and the spider is building out its web and eating and resting. And thoughts begin to come up normally, and they're much more subtle, and they're much more I was going to say honest. Actually, that was the word that was going to come up. Was because you slow down, and the stimuli are slower. You're also starting to dial back all of the. You're cutting out all of the dressings on the salad. Like, we've never tasted salad because we have dressings all over it. We don't actually know what lettuce tastes like. So it's sort of like, what is lettuce? Well, it's actually this really subtle thing, right?
Yeah.
So I think until we can get to a place where we're actually not just like a matchstick meets the matchbox, and we're just scraping ourselves against it every time, or the question of how much pain we can take is almost irrelevant. Like, we haven't even created space for a self to emerge.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the only thing. The self is the only thing that can make sense of, moderate, understand, articulate the framing of pain, and whether pain is even painful at all. So pain can be understood as pleasure, and pleasure could be understood as pain. It's all interpretable. There's actually there's no distinction between them. We define a distinction. So that's why we have, I mean, I don't really want to go here, but that's why there is sort of the sexual relationships where things that are ostensibly very painful are actually very much enjoyed.
Mm-hmm.
And people say, well, there's something wrong with that. Well, maybe there is, in a certain sense. Like, maybe there are certain things that got those people to where they were, but there is still a reality there. And that reality is that they actually interpret a thing that is often painful to most of us as pleasure,
Mm-hmm.
and vice versa. A happy relationship could actually be very painful for somebody.
Yeah.
So why? Because, well, insert a million reasons here. So that's work that really needs to be. We need to just accept that, and build selves that are separate from the stimuli of the city. And we've been living in cities for a very long time. So I think many of us, before the advent of technology, modern social media and so on, already had this problem. We were zipping from thing to thing. We were the same routine every day. The routines were very loud. Steam engines have been loud for a very long time, and subways have been loud. And we're all crowded in together. I mean, we've been in that context for a long time. So this is just that on steroids, but it's not new. So I think the dopamine hits have always been there, and there is something to be said for separating and trying to start to formulate what we are in the midst of all of that, outside of that.
Yeah. You'd said something, so circling back to the pain and pleasure part, and it's context, and it's assigning meaning. Like, if you, again, pausing to be like, oh, this is what you would think might be painful, but then it's like, no, this is actually nice and fun, because you are assigning meaning to what that is in your world. It's not because the stimulation is different. It's the same stimulus, right? And so you're turning it into what you wish it to be, and then it can be that, and that's, I think, shaping our worlds through our choice of the meaning that we assign to things is very powerful. And then you had mentioned trust, like trusting yourself again. And, when when we live in a world with so many voices outside telling us this, and that, and society telling us this and that. Um, and then when we do make mistakes and when things don't go the way that we were anticipating them to go, and because maybe we listen to someone else instead of our inner voices or this higher voice, Bob, whatever we call it, um, uh, the trust is diminished and we second guess ourselves, especially if there's maybe a mess that is a result of what's going on with our listening skills. And so how do you regain trust with yourself after things have gone a little like, whoa, that was scary? Like, how do you learn to trust your voice again?
I wish I had a good answer. I think, I mean, in many ways, that's been sort of that's been my whole life, is trying to figure that question out. And it seems slow and precarious and uncertain. And sometimes, sometimes somebody will unlock something for you
Mm-hmm.
and give you a little piece that keeps you going. And for some people the answer is faith. I think that's wonderful. I was talking to a friend last night, very Christian, and she was telling me that God turned on all the lights in her room and she realized that she was just bumping into furniture this whole time, and now she could just get out of the room if she wanted to.
Mm.
And I think if you don't have that faith, if you don't have that connection with God, I think the answer is a little harder. And I can say what not to do. That is to say, don't trust what society has to offer. It really doesn't have very much. The pharmaceuticals,
Mhm.
um, the the flashy stuff. It's never meant to bring. They're products. They're not meant to bring you closer to yourself. They'll promise you everything, but you were born with yourself and you'll die with yourself. So you don't need any outside help per se for that. And the hope is just that you can find something that feels more like you than things you've seen in your life. So you might see a river and maybe the sound of it. I mean, I'm thinking of Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha, a great book. I recommend it. It's a very great intro and to sort of Eastern philosophy, in the sense that a German wrote it and tried to embody that philosophy. I think he did a good job. But he talks about, or the character Siddhartha talks about, this feeling of just being on a river and learning a lot from the river. And there may just be a stimulus in the world that is like that, a quiet mountain or a beach, and you may really resonate with it. And if your temptation is to learn from it, then I would shamelessly encourage you to claim that that thing is your teacher.
Mm.
And maybe, the ocean is it works with the moon, but it still has, it has tides because of the moon, but that made it itself, and it won't really, it's always changing, and yet there is a kind of pattern and rhythm to it. So that, listening to that and grappling with that, letting yourself be with it, get in a staring contest with the ocean and see who wins, as it were. That's my advice. Get into a staring contest with the ocean. That's, yeah. So that's the best I've got. And maybe something really does come out of that, and you see something in yourself you didn't see before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love getting into a staring contest with the ocean. That's the best. I want to follow up on a couple things, but I want to be sensitive of your time. I know we've been on for a while. How are you doing? You cool? Okay, great. Let me know, like, shut up or whatever. um, coming back to what you had said earlier about celebrating your wins and losses, right? And taking ownership for both. I'm wondering with the trust part, like when you see evidence of a win in your life, no matter how small it is, like I got out of bed today, made my bed, or I brushed my teeth, or I called somebody and said, I love you, whatever it is, or I got the client, like constantly remembering to recognize those wins. I wonder, that to me feels like a way to start trusting myself again, and gaining like, yeah, you're on the right path. And here's evidence of it. And let's shine the light on all of the wins, right? What do you think about that?
I love that. I love it especially because I used to have this bad habit of writing a goal, but never being so clear about the goal so that I could always say I won.
Mm,
Does that make sense? Yeah. So the
yeah.
stakes would never be real. I was afraid of losing, and so I would create these really vague, do this thing, or I'd be like, well, I mostly did it. Well, mostly doing it is not doing it, so you didn't do
Hmm.
it. And so I think, yeah, you want to break free from that and let the stakes be real. I guess that goes back to the beginning of our conversation. Really define a goal, or really be willing to lose, and then when you win it, it's that much more meaningful.
Yeah. And it's like the micro wins of the day are important to acknowledge, because this journey of a goal sometimes takes quite a bit of time, And so rather than I'm not there, it's like, okay, I made some progress today. And like, at the end of the day, give yourself a V, like, or a W, a win, a victory. I think it goes a long way for calming that nervous system down a little bit too, and feeling like this is just a process and it's going to, be okay. And we're going to keep moving forward here. Um, the, then you had mentioned, um, really knowing yourself and looking for the things outside and what's really not filling you up and what society doesn't offer us, and not looking to society for things. Like, I think we're programmed, I call it the 5 Ds. And I think we're trying to fill up this soul hole, I call it, with really what is God, this, the spiritual connection to this beautiful flow of life. But we're presented with these 5 Ds. I call them diamonds, drugs, digital, donuts, and dicks. And and we're constantly thinking that like this thing from the outside is going to make me feel whole, and I'm going to be powerful, or I'm going to have meaning, or it's going to ease my pain, or when I get the next raise, or the next thing to eat, or the next substance, or the next lover, or whatever. We think that that's going to ease our this hole, and it's like pouring water in a bucket that's got the empty hole. And the only thing that's going to stop that flow from getting out is the shape of the hole. And to me, the shape of the hole is that higher voice. It's love, it's spirit, it's that divine mystery, and knowing, like staring at having the staring contest with the ocean, like that to me is something that fills that hole up with what is true for me personally. So what do you think about, those things on the external that are like junk food,
Yeah, I'm gonna save that. That's pretty great. Pretty great.
The 5 Ds, baby. Let's go. I know it's in the book.
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna pull that one out at a cocktail party, or inappropriately at a conference, just in total non sequitur. What do you think of Bitcoin? Well, I think it's not one of the 5 Ds. Oh, what are the 5 Ds?
It's the big B, baby. It's not
Yeah,
the 5 Ds.
that's right, right. You can have one big B or 5 little Ds. Which do
Oh.
you want? Um, no. Oh no. So so wait, what was I answering?
It's circling to the awareness, I think, of the programming of society. It doesn't have what we want, right? It is true that they are trying to sell us something all the time. All of those 5 things are something on the outside trying to sell us their version of how we think we're supposed to be versus our authentic version of ourselves. And so remembering that those are external forces supported by multi-trillion dollars of years of trying to shape us so that we can conform, so that we can be controlled, so that we don't uprise and overtake too many things, and we can be in this for lack of a better word, the slave pattern, or a slave mindset. And so it's like this multi-headed monster. What is it? A tetra or the
A hydra.
hydra? Thank you. That doesn't have okay, here's the central force that's trying to do this, but there are all these forces that are like, you're not pretty enough, or you need to be skinnier, or your car sucks, or you're dating the wrong person, or la 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 la. Your power position isn't high enough on the scale. So we're constantly trying to think that these other things are going to fill us and give us that sense of meaning and truth, but they never do. So it's this battle. It's this constant battle to like, this isn't real. And what is real for me individually?
I would say this. I think for most people, actually, one of the most important questions of conscience might be something like, am I really an individual?
That's
And
a great one.
yeah, and the answer might actually be no. I'm not an individual. In other words, I don't have the capacity to develop an authentic self. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that answer. We're so just to, even to claim that you must have an individual self is still part of this atomized system that insists on that.
Mm-hmm.
I think many people really do just want to be told what the way to live. And there is nothing wrong with that. There's zero wrong with that. And we should not be, no one should be patronizing about that. The problem isn't that. The problem is that society tells you what to be so badly. It's such a bad suggestion, and we need to fix that. Excuse the noise. But
don't worry, it's fine. It's true. And oh my gosh, when I so 6 years ago, after the suicide attempt, I went to rehab because alcohol was a huge problem, that led up to this whole thing. And I, went from like, yay, we have dinner parties and happy hour to like, uh-oh, this is like my coping mechanism. And I've got to, I'll get out of my funk. But anyway, so I ended up going to rehab, which was just like okay, that's your reset boot camp kind of place. That's just to get you level, right? And then afterward, it's like, that's where the real work actually gets to happen. You get to go in and process things. But, in the 12-step program, which I did, and then I did the whole 12 steps. And I think the 12-step program across the board is very, very good and helpful, but it's missing a few ingredients as far as the identity of being an X, whatever it is. You're a bulimic, you're a coke addict, you're a gambler. So like when you associate with that identity that they want you to be, so that you can always be in this like place of non-power and surrender. I didn't ascribe to that. It felt very like, well, how am I supposed to evolve out of this old thing? So that felt shameful and repressive for me as somebody who thinks I can evolve. Not that I'm supposed to go drink alcohol again. That's not the point. The point is I'm not like a defective, diseased person for my whole life. I'm just somebody who this isn't good for me, these substances, and I need to come up with other things. But one of the things that I learned from a sponsor that I had worked with, she was just like, we are not designed to do anything all alone. Like we are not solo creatures. We are social creatures and we are communal creatures. And so we're impacted and influenced by our society and our surroundings. And so even if you lived in a cave for 10 years, you're going to be influenced and impacted by the cave itself and by the crickets in the cave and by the way that the sunshine shines through. And it's time for me to go do the sunbathing. I'm going to sun my balls or whatever the guys are doing these days. But like you're influenced by all these things. And so we are, we
Sun your
rely,
balls.
Say it again.
Definitely sun your balls. Definitely.
Yes, on your balls. Oh my God. But like we can't extract ourselves from that. There's no extract, and so that's where that concept of like really being aware of what you're allowing in your surroundings, what and who, what consumption model you're having with the things that you listen to, read, hear, play, talk, touch, it's where you spend your time. And so you can never be completely all of you. You are sculpted by all these other things, and so having the mindfulness to make choices that are like, this is the sculpture that I want to be, based on these other, ingredients around me. And so, young men today, particularly, I have a 14-year-old son, and he's very influenced by a lot of the YouTubers, and he's very influenced by the games. And of course, now he's a high schooler. So it's this whole in the corral of, oh my God, and I went over there to the high school on, I don't know, a couple days ago for the parent night. And they only have 5 minutes to get between classes, and the building's huge. And there's 2,000 kids. So their energy is so just like, trying to go between here and bumping into each other. And it was really ultra stressful, like so stressful. And they're trapped. Like these kids are trapped there. And of course, I'm like, let's go live on a boat. I'll travel around the world with you and teach you about life on a sailboat. This would be way better education. And they're like, no, mom, we don't like school, but we're not leaving and we're not going to do that. And so how would you speak to young men, particularly about listening for their own authentic truth with 2,000 other people, and then the multi-billion trillion dollar industry like assaulting them at such a young age? Big question. So sorry.
No, it's huge, but it's also, it's very important. I think if I were to talk to young kids, I mean, what I try to say to as many kids as possible is don't go to college. College is dead. There's, you're never going to be in a situation where 2,000 people roughly your age are in the same space again, ever. It's not a realistic place.
Yeah.
And if you can go find something you want to do, like go learn to farm, like do something you'll never, when you're 14, you can ask adults for just about anything and they'll help you. People want to help. So
Yeah.
the great thing is that you could go up to farmers and you'd say, look, I'd really like to help work on the ranch. And there are farmers out there who will say, all right, good luck. Here's some
Jason
boots.
Rick, let's go.
And, there are business people who will let you work with them for a day if you're willing to help or add value. There's so many openings in the world, and everybody is looking for somebody talented. Get out there, go try things, go email people, go learn to email people. And the best way to get away from all of this is to do extracurriculars that are very meaningful, and then maybe even to think about or explore totally different alternatives to high school altogether. I know people have a thing about getting a GED, but maybe if you get a GED and you have a plan, like you go, if you want to do community college and then balance it with building a business or learning to code or something else, you've just freed up hours of your day. Community college is actually much more flexible. They treat you like an adult. So it's not so bad to be at a community college collecting units instead of a high school. And most of high school is really how much social life do you get in a high school? 6-minute breaks during a period, 30-minute lunches, 15-minute, eat snack period. Like, what does that add up to? You could get more doing a sport. So do the math, get out as much as you can. And if you would honestly almost always be better off searching Wikipedia, like learning through Wikipedia, than you would sitting in a high school. And I think I don't know why it's controversial, actually. I stand by that point. Yeah.
Well, I think of like, remember Good Will Hunting, and like how he was just like, yeah, I'm just read the books here at the library. I'll figure this out. You got everything here. And clearly there's that. Some of us are people who want to be told what to do. Just tell me what to do. I'll check the boxes. I'll read the thing. I'll regurgitate it. Okay. I'll try to solve some problems. So some people are not like that entrepreneurial mindset. Some people are just like, they're better suited to do kind of more rote work or more, like that type of work. And my mom is somebody like that. She would never start a business. She would never go have that anything. She's somebody who's like, she worked at the insurance company, right? And she was the secretary. So she was just like, this is what I know how to do. And I'm going to file and organize and all those things. And the idea, the stress level, if you told somebody like her with her composition to say, go out and explore this or go do this, she would have, her head would explode, right? It's like, no, thanks. But my son, on the other hand, he's already like, well, I can start a Shopify store, mom, and I can do these things. And I'm like, fuck yeah, dude, let's do that. I'll help you and we'll learn these things. Let's get you some mentors. You can go, intern at people's places and go volunteer at other businesses. And he's like, if I can make 100 grand in a year, can I drop out of college or high school? And I'm like, yeah, totally. Like, you can do it if you show that that's something, like, I will support you 1,000,000%. But he's not taking the steps because he's getting like, oh, my buddies and this and that, so it's not that that's the right path for him necessarily, but he's getting pulled into that quicksand of the, oh, well, my friends are going to hang out after school and we're doing this thing. And it's like, it's a tough one, because these schools, like you said, they don't teach anything. They're containers. They're literally containers for humans until they get from, not legal age to legal age, and then, okay, off with you. It's a weird system that we have. And to me, that whole system needs to get reinvigorated or something needs to happen.
Well, yeah, two thoughts. First, personal anecdote. One of the hardest things about high school, middle school, and elementary school for me was that I was lacking in peers who were as interested in starting things or in building things as I was.
Yeah.
And I was not a tinkerer, but I was an organizer. I still am, I suppose. I love setting up organizations. I love putting things together. I love coming up with a vision for a project. And I love systems level thinking, ecosystems, and then diving into the details and just trying to pull out what's there. So how to regenerate soil is as interesting to me as, I don't know, ethical AI. So those things are all interesting, but I just didn't, most people were just coasting. The system had already killed them by then. Because it would be one thing to have a whole group of people where everyone is like, well, I'm not interested in what you're interested in, and I'm interested in this. But that's not what high school allows. High school basically wants all of you dead, just deadened all the time. And that was the vibe. And that was a very draining experience for me. So that's number one. And number two, you shouldn't trust any building that has bad architecture. Never trust a poorly built building. Never trust anything built, anything that exists in a poorly built building. And that's not to say, the small startup in there isn't possibly interesting, but most of the time, if you look at a middle school, it looks like a prison.
Yep.
Because it is a prison. Done. End of story. There, it says like when somebody tells you who they are, believe them, right? So when a building shows you what it looks like, believe it. It's a prison.
Yeah.
So there are literally pictures of prisons from 1890 that have this outrageously beautiful architecture, and it's these very elaborate moldings and statues, and it was very interesting. And then you look at a modern middle school, and it's just box architecture, this cheap sort of funneled out, no trees, all asphalt, concrete. That's not an environment for children. That's not an environment for people.
It's not. There's no inspiration there. There's no sense of wonder or awe with like, what's the next thing that we get to do? Like, I love not trusting a building that isn't designed well. I feel that very much so in my environment. I'm very sensitive to how things feel. It's like, oh, this flows. This is good. This is invigorating. Or other things are just like, I can't wait to get out of this place. Right. And so we wonder, not actually wonder, but like, this is why kids are seeking addictive substances to numb the it's like that fan noise in the background. It's like, rah, it's just grating at you. And you're like, well, this is kind of what I have to do. So how can I how can I ease that, like, ugh, that discomfort, you know? And their self-regulation mechanisms and their coping mechanisms aren't developed yet, and they're certainly not being taught in any of these buildings, you
Yes.
know? And so they're being taught, like, the 5 Ds, right?
Yes. If
And
that, you'd
yeah,
be lucky if that's what they teach you. Yeah.
yeah.
I just one step further is they're not just in a building that is vapid and meaningless, as vapid and meaningless as what's being taught there, but they also often are in cities that are interchangeable, vapid
Mhm.
and meaningless. So what's, like you'll really get a sense of this if you're in the United States listening to this and you go visit Santa Fe, New Mexico, for example. Santa Fe has a very distinct style. It is like no other city in the world.
Mhm.
And when you show up and you sit there and you look around at the Adobe architecture and you walk around and you get a sense of the main town and the church is from whatever the 1600s in the main square, you know that you can be no other place in the world. That actually does something to you
Mhm.
psychically, that you're in a distinct place. You can be distinct. You're not interchangeable. It's not just the same skyscraper everywhere. It's not just the same, whatever, Motel 6, the same cookie cutter house built by developers, that there is actually a distinct style and intention to the place. So we have this very sad and difficult situation where people want homes, so they built as many homes the same way as cheaply as possible. And
Mhm.
someplace in Iowa looks just like someplace in Kentucky, looks like someplace in Florida. And the only thing that's different, quite literally, is the climate. Literally. How do you build a universe out of that? You're
Mhm.
limited. And so that's, it's just one of the things that we have to think of at a systems level, that hopefully people get inspired to invent new forms of new aesthetics to try to
Mhm.
reflect who they are and what they want to be. And there's so many ways we could design, so many new, we haven't scratched the surface of architecture yet. We think we have, but I don't think we've come close. And I think there's just something very interesting to mine there. So if you like architecture, please, for the love of God, fix this.
Yeah, oh my gosh, exactly. Like, um, uh, I think about regenerative agriculture, you know? I think about, do you know, Will Harris and uh, uh, Texas Slim? Okay, so Will
Do yeah, we've connected. Yeah, yeah.
so they're doing the conference, but Will had a really good video that was up about how he went from being, uh, the commercial cattle rancher, how many heads of cattle can I get on this little piece of, 1 acre per acre? Like, how much meat am I going to produce? Right. And he goes through his journey of understanding, like, wow, this is the old way of doing things, right? Like, what's the most you can, just like with the track housing and everything. There's no inspiration there. It's just what's the most for the minimum, right? And I just love the mindset of, like, what's the best I can get out of this, and what's the most uh, impactful and meaningful, not just the most. It's obviously the quality over the quantity and the longevity of it too, because obviously the soil needs to get, keep us alive here on this gorgeous earth. And so you think of, like, that in terms of, like, regenerative cities and regenerative communities and regenerative school ideas. And so it's like, how can we apply that same principle to either revamping, revitalizing what's there, you know, um, or just obviously starting from scratch in certain places with a lot more intentionality with that. I mean, are you familiar with the Venus Project with Jacques Fresco? I think is that his name?
Familiar. Yeah, I'd have
So
to.
it's just, it's his whole vision for these really, regenerative communities around the world. And so it's like, and Bitcoiners are starting to, like, let's make our citadels and let's do this more intentional long-term plan, and I like the idea of the Bitcoin citadels. I love the idea of all of us, like, "Yay, we're gonna go get Costa Rica property, and here we go, and we're gonna build our own thing." And there's most of us aren't gonna be able to go do that and leave our current situation. So it's like, how do we navigate what's in front of us, and can we retool it in a way that's gonna give us the maximum impact for what we can change here, without having to start from scratch. How do we fix that? What do we do? Big question, Robert. Robert's like, are you kidding me?
Maybe if you don't mind, let's shoot for a part two, and we can. I don't know. You want to try and dive into that then?
I would love to. I think that would be another dive for sure. And I do want to talk also about ethical AI in the other one too, because I think that's an interesting. I'd be curious how those two things could go together.
Yeah. There's a
Because
lot to talk about.
there's
Yeah.
so much. Oh my gosh, we were just talking about this AI last night, and um, yeah, it's a lot. Like, yeah, we'll thumbtack that for another episode. But I think this might be a good spot. Like, yeah, this is good. I think this is a good wrapping point for this chapter of our hopefully lots of talks on the journey of life together. Um, is there just any one thing that you would share with the audience that has been a blessing for you, being somebody, being a coda, or being somebody who is a survivor of a rock bottom? Like, what's a blessing an unexpected blessing for you?
I would say I'm very thankful for the ability to sit in others' shoes. I think I get caught in my own head a lot. I'm very heady. I'm really stuck there most of the time. And funny enough, I think sometimes that makes me kind of an airhead. I'm busy daydreaming. And one of the great things about perspective is it's very grounding, and it almost always encourages you to be grateful and really down to earth. So sign language interpreting really did that. You will interpret for people whose lives you did not understand. You thought you got it, and then you went into it and you realized you didn't get it. And then, you're probably not going to get it. But you get more than you got. And that's not quite a solution to preventing suicide, but it does give texture to your pain. And I think it helps you breathe for just a little longer. And sometimes, when you're really down in that space, every second counts. And time is not, in those very dark moments, time is not a linear phenomenon. It's very broken. It's very staccato. The moments don't feel like they're passing. They feel like they're striking, or they feel like they're muffled. There's you've almost become detached from your sense of time, and that's maybe the worst thing about depression, suicidal ideation that's very serious, is if you're untethered from time, you don't really have a you anymore, and not in any good divine ayahuasca style way. You're really left with nothing. So perspective in those terrible moments can keep you alive, because even if you're in that state, that a butterfly is not. And that's really a relief, however small.
Yeah. It is a breath by breath experience sometimes, going through these things and remembering, like, that's all you have to do is get to the next breath and be with this breath that is in your beautiful lungs right now. And if that's your victory for the moment, high five yourself, and then repeat and repeat. and repeat.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to, if it's okay, really quickly, I wanted to share the red circle.
Yeah,
Can you
sure.
talk about that just really quick? I have it up here.
Yeah. So, basic premise of the Red Circle, it's a group of people who have struggled with suicide or who wanted to do something about it, lost a friend to it, and really great individuals on board actually, and very thankful to know them and to be able to work with them. We have the basic premise is psychological first aid, so helping people grapple with giving people the basic tools to help their friends out of a serious suicidal moment so they can get more help, maybe even professional help. And so one of the questions we were trying to resolve was how can we do a workshop that gives people a sense to be comfortable beyond small talk, to really get into the deep stuff, to sort of like NVC, not very far from it necessarily, actually, but to give people a sense of how to work with and grapple with somebody's deepest dangers, and how to get a sense for what opens that person up versus what closes them. And that's actually very hard to systematize, but we wanted to kind of create simulated conversations and even just a certain, get people acclimated to a certain orientation of being so that what they say is empowered by how they say it. You can say the right thing, but if you say it wrongly to somebody who's in that state, it doesn't really matter what you said. They're not really hearing what you say necessarily. So we want to kickstart that project. Scale it is what I'm trying to say. We really want to scale it. And if you're interested in the idea and you'd like to learn more, please reach out.
And everybody can find you on Twitter. Is that a good spot, or your website? Or so on Twitter, for those of you listening, not watching, it's RJ Malka, Malka, and then malkarobert.com, Malka Robert.com. Are these the best places for folks to reach out to you?
Yes, absolutely. And then you can also reach me by email. I'm robert@malkarobert.com. Pretty straightforward. And I know members of the wonderful team at the Red Circle would love to hear from you as well. So I'm happy to make introductions and bring this further to life and even iterate on the workshop. There's always more work to do. And I think we need this kind of thing now more than ever. And we need it in person. We were doing this during COVID, and we realized that a virtual workshop was just not going to cut it for something this sensitive. So any way that we can create real connection, real engagement, even real laughter, real camaraderie, help people open up about their experiences, what brought them to something like this workshop. There's a lot of great work to be done.
There is, and it's very important work, like you said, right now, especially more than ever, coming off the heels of this ridiculous separation we've had to experience. It's the conversations, like communication is obviously so important, self-communication, and then learning how to communicate with others about these difficult feelings. And like, how do you talk to your friend who you see is in a spiral, but maybe they don't see that they're in that spiral, and feeling like a sense of it's okay to say something, and it's we're not taught that. Nobody teaches us this. And I think it's something that would really benefit all of us, is to learn, like, as that could be something that would go in the schools as part of, like, how do you identify what's going on with somebody that you care about? How do you feel like skillful to have a conversation about it? It's one thing to bring things up. It's another to do it skillfully, like you said. And so I think this is great work, and I really want to, yeah, let me know how I can support, like, the Red Circle. It's the redcircle.net for everybody that wants to check it out. It's great.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, definitely. So, okay, Robert. So you and I, we're gonna have another part 2 talking about some good stuff and regenerative cities, ethical AI, and who knows what comes after that one. But
Right. Just keep on chugging.
totally. And thank you so much for taking all of this time on your Sunday to share your wisdom and your love and your story with everybody. It's, I always think if one person hears us talk about anything and they get like a little nugget, like you never know if that person's like the next Bob Marley or Martin Luther King or whoever. And they're like, I heard Robert say this. So thank you so much for being so honest and powerful and brave. I really, really admire you. And
It's my pleasure.
yeah.
I'm really glad to have been on. Really grateful.
Thank you so much. And everybody else who's listening, you guys can go get show notes at djvaleriebeloved.com. And you can follow me on Twitter at djvaleriebeloved. But most important, go follow Robert and on Twitter at rjmalka and malkarobert.com. And thanks everybody again. This is DJ Val and the Bitcoin Piece of Music podcast. And thanks so much, Robert, for being a great guest. And we'll talk to you guys next time. Aloha. Okay. Yay.